For my book review video essay, I chose to do it on Judaism, and it was mostly because I wanted to learn more about it, because even though it's one of the not most common, but very common religion in America, I don't really know that much about it, and I feel like my knowledge, like a lot of other people my age's knowledge, goes only as far as World War II and the Holocaust. This tragic genocide is an extremely important thing to learn, obviously, but I feel like it is often the end of people's knowledge about Judaism, and people don't often delve further into the topic. We know that Jews were killed en masse because of their religious beliefs, but what actually were their religious beliefs and practices? The book that I chose for this video is called Judaism, 2nd edition by Norman Solomon. And one of the first things that he talks about in this book is the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. And one of the first parts that really jumped out at me was the author explaining that the English language is not neutral and comes loaded with Christian ideals and assumptions. I found that very interesting and honestly shocking, because it's something that I've never really considered, but once I thought about it, I realized that it's very true. Not having grown up religious makes me wonder how many things I saw and heard that were of Christian descent or had Christian undertones, and I didn't even know because it's so embedded in our society. This directly relates to Judaism for a number of reasons, as early on Christianity defined itself as against Judaism, but the two religions were once one cohesive religion. Though in today's standards, not every Christian has the same belief, there are undertones still present in today's society. And I feel it's important to take yourself out of the Americanized, Christianized view of Judaism and look at it at its core and how it defines itself. And that's also something that the author of this book explained. The author talked about how a lot of times people try to use Americanized words laced with, once again, Christian undertones to inquire about Judaism. So things like, how do Jewish people feel about Jesus and heaven and that sort of thing. But in order to really understand it on its own level and within itself, you have to find the right words. Some words like salvation and covenant are words that are used in both Christianity and Judaism, but their meaning does not coincide. To understand what Judaism is, we first must understand who the Jews are and their history. Unlike some other religions, it is hard to pigeonhole the Jewish people into a specific category, like religion or nation or nationality, as they don't really fit into any of these decided categories. The range of variety in practicing Jews is very vast, so it's hard to pin down exactly what categories Jewish people fall into. In ancient times, the other people in the world viewed the Jews as chosen by God, but they had rejected Jesus and therefore were condemned to a lowly status until they finally recognized him as their savior. Through political power, Christians were able to act on these beliefs and preconceived notions about Jews and forced them into poverty and accusing them of terrible acts. even in the artwork from this time period, Jews were portrayed with dastardly features, having been seen in depictions of the devil. These stereotypes and propaganda that were pushed by Christians and others have evolved through the times, but can still be seen in modern day society. One thing I've noticed as a trend is there are lots of rumors or propaganda or accusations about who Jewish people are and what they believe, but why don't we think about how the Jewish people actually define themselves? The Jewish people in ancient times saw themselves as God's chosen people, and that sentiment remains true in modern-day Judaism today. While Christians and some other religions, like Muslims, viewed the exile of Jews to be a rejection by God, the Jews themselves had a different view on it. They thought that it only proved that they were God's chosen people as, quote, "Those who he loves, the Lord does chastise." Proverbs 3:11. This optimistic way of thinking is something that I find incredibly unique and interesting. Their faith is so strong that even faced with the many, many adversities that they were faced with, they still believed that their God was doing it out of love for them. Even as Jews began to gain civil rights in France and England, though they gained rights, they were still denied their self-understanding as a special people. The book mentions that when Jews were given rights and considered citizens of France, they had to abandon their collective distinctiveness and autonomy. I mentioned previously that Judaism and Christianity were once a unified religion, and the reason that ended was the book mentions that in ancient times there was a meeting in Jerusalem in which there were many disagreements about things that should be taken from the Torah and whether certain laws of the Torah were still applicable. The book states that this was not just a quarrel about doctrine, but a serious social rift, and ultimately what drove the religion to split into two. St. Paul had a plan to absorb Gentiles into the community of believers. This plan proved incompatible with the way that the Jews understood themselves as a people or a community. Instead of unifying it, this generated two conflicting groups, each of which claiming that they were the true Israel. This is when Christians broke off and were opposed and became opposed to Jews. In modern day, we can see this conflict still present, whether it's in media or in society. The author also mentions that because of a lot of Jewish historians and writers that recounted the trials and tribulations of the Jewish people were so focused on getting across the martyrdom and spirit of the Jewish people and how hard they fought for their religion that a lot of times the creativity and celebration side of the religion gets overshadowed. And even in modern day, I think that's still very much present, as a lot of people only hear about and see the tragic parts of Judaism and don't know about the history or practices. But I will say that was my biggest takeaway from the book, how trusting and faithful the Jewish people remained through everything.